This week on the Mindful Men podcast.
And so you touched on stroke and pre-stroke and post-stroke life. To start off with, I love informing people of the mindful men community about all these different things that go on in our lives. And there might be people that haven't heard of a stroke or know what it is. So can you start by just giving us an idea of what you believe a stroke to be?
Well, interesting. Mine was slightly different to what your standard traditional stroke might be. And what I mean is that I have a brain condition, reversible vaso syndrome, which I didn't know I had. And it's about the bottom 5% of people with that condition end up stroke. And so it's due to the restriction in my brain and the blood not being able to get to the site that caused my stroke. But I did have the stroke-like symptoms. We did think stroke in the moment. So I was getting ready to run a boot camp. I'd had my 3 kids. I had stepped away from doing clinical therapy at that stage, and I had started running a fitness business. That's a completely different story. I love talking business, but that's not why we're on today. And I went up to the bathroom to get dressed, and I remember getting this headache on my left and pins and needles down my right. But when I say headache, I mean like my life is in danger. I am in deep shit right now. Like this is, and I screamed out to my husband, and I remember thinking, I'm having a stroke. Oh no, I can't be. I'm 30, I'm fit. Like all of this went through my head, and my husband got up to the bathroom and he thought exactly the same thing. He has a background in radiography and sonography, so background in medical, and he thought she's having a stroke. Oh no, she's 30, she's fit. There's no way. And then, he drove me to the hospital. By the time I got to the hospital, I could not recognize anyone that I knew because he works there. Couldn't recognize my mom. We were driving into town. We're about 5 Ks from the hospital, and I looked over at the speedo and saw that he was going extremely fast and thinking he's going to crash. Like there's no way he can drive that fast and us get to the hospital. And that's probably my last memory, solid memory that I have. And then after that, it just, everything started to slide, and we got there, couldn't recognize anyone. They thought being so young and fit, it must be a migraine, because often a migraine can mimic stroke-like symptoms. And the next morning was when they realized that something more serious and sinister was going on. I'd lost vision in both my quadrants of my eyes, top quadrants, and I'd lost my short-term memory. They went and took me for an MRI, and it showed up that I'd had a stroke. So they airlifted me to Sydney. We're about 5 hours between Sydney and Brisbane. And so they airlifted me to Sydney to RPA, and that's when I started to get the treatment that I needed. So once I got to Sydney, they had me in ICU in the neuro ward, and I was really fortunate to be able to still stand and walk around. A lot of people, that's not what they can do. And I did have trouble with balance and standing on one leg, but really the part of my brain that had been impacted was where my short-term memory is stored, and also my vision.
Wow, that's huge. Like as someone in their 30s to be going through, did you think like this was the end? Like this was your last days on earth? Like what was going through your mind? Do you remember?
When I first got that headache, I definitely thought my life is over. I remember having that kind of, I don't know if you'd call it an aura, or just this feeling that came over me that I was in a lot of trouble and that I may not get out of this. Once I got to Sydney, I don't have a lot of memory of that time. When I think back to it though, I remember just fighting every day for how do I get through this next day? So for me, it wasn't like, how do I get through the next month? And then what's next year going to look like? And am I ever going to get my memory back? It was really this sense of you need to just bring it right in and focus right in on what is the one thing you can do next. Like, what do you need to know now, or what do you need to try now to help with your recovery? Whereas I'm pretty sure if you ask my husband, he was the opposite. He was, what is our life going to look like? And he's the mother of my 3 children that, like, there were times that I had trouble walking. There was, I don't know how you describe it, but pseudo seizures, and I don't know whether they were mini strokes, but there were times that I couldn't speak. I couldn't move my limbs. I'd be having these seizure-like activity in the bed where my whole body would be shaking, where I couldn't feel anything. And that was pretty scary. And they were happening on and off throughout the whole day. And my husband was constantly thinking, well, what's our life going to look like? You know, will she recover? If she does recover, is she ever going to recover to full capacity? You know, those kind of questions. So he held the future in his mind. I was very much in the present. I was like, how do I learn more about this? Who is the best person to talk to? Where is the physio? Where's the neurologist? What can they tell me? How can I find out what the one next thing is?
So what happened when you got to hospital? Do you do surgery? Is there treatment? Like, can you talk us through what you had to go through there?
Yes. And again, let's preface this, my short-term memory loss. If you talk to me, you talk to my husband, the stories can look slightly different. But my recollection of it was we arrived and they did a barrage of tests, MRIs. They did the one that they go in your thigh and up into your brain and have a look. That's when they found out that I was having those vasoconstrictions in my brain. I just remember there being lots of people around my bed. So there was like the doctor and then the doctor and then the people training up to be a doctor and then even more because it was quite a rare condition at that stage. So they were very interested in it. And just trying to think back to it, it feels so long ago. I think it's about 9 years. Yeah, it was scary, confronting. I felt extremely vulnerable. In the ICU, in the neuro ward, you have all the beds that go around in the circle and the nurses stations in the middle, but you often don't have your curtains pulled so that they can always see you at all times. And there's someone that stands next to your bed 24/7. So there was always a nurse there watching over me the whole time. And there were lots of moments that I thought, I'm in a lot of trouble if someone's got to stand next to my bed all the time, but I didn't quite comprehend what that translated to. I just had that feeling.
And so when people were standing around, like, were your kids coming in to see you? Like, did you recognize them?
My husband says they did come in. They flew my 3 kids down. My mum and my mother-in-law and my husband all flew down to Sydney. I don't remember them being there at all. Interestingly, my daughter, who's now 12, came into my bed just this week and she started crying. And I was like, are you okay, honey? She's like, people just don't understand. They think that they're having a tough time because their bag strap breaks or, their pen lid gets dropped. And she's like, that's not tough. Like, we've just been dealing with all of these things. We've had a whole heap of medical since my stroke. At the moment, my other daughter's been off school for 6 weeks because she's been incredibly unwell with a chronic illness. My mum's got dementia. Like, there's a whole list of things, right? But my daughter said in that moment, she's like, watching your mum have these seizures. I don't know how scary that is. Like, that is hard. Not knowing if your mum's going to get off the ground. And that really that was like an arrow to the heart because I thought she was so little she couldn't possibly remember.
It's interesting when our kids start to reflect back our life situations, our life challenges to us. As a parent, did you feel a sense of remorse or guilt that, what's happened to you is rubbing off on your daughter like that? Or do you actually feel more proud that she's tuning into that?
I struggled and my tears more often than not were around being a parent. Not being the parent I want to be, not being available the way that I want to be available, not being able to do the things that I thought in my head and the expectations that I'd set up for myself around what parenting looked like. For 2 years post my stroke, I had headaches every day. Obviously, the young kids my husband describes, he used to put all 3 of them in the car and just drive around the farm for hours because I couldn't have noise in the background. I think back to that time and how critical those formative years are for our kids and their connection and their growth and their development of relationships. And I was in bed, either sleeping or with this headache where I couldn't have any noise or light around me. Even though I don't remember that time, I have a sense of sadness around what potentially I missed and what the kids missed from their mum. Like, we're so fortunate as well that I'm how I am now. I'm so grateful that I've had the recovery that I've had. But when you're in it, you don't know that that's the recovery you're going to have. I didn't know that I would ever get back to a place that I could work, drive, be alone with the kids, know if I had undies on, know if I'd eaten that day. Like, I had a sign on my front door that says, don't walk out, you have 3 children.
You touched on there, like the sign in itself, but also your husband taking the kids out on the farm and driving them around. What else did you have to do to adapt to life post the stroke? What were the things that you had to do in those earlier years to be well or just to be okay?
There were lots of things. One that I remember distinctly was trying to work out how to create a brain outside of my head. How do I replicate what used to work and now isn't? So I rang my friends that I knew were really systemized, really organized. And I said things like, how do you clean the rubbish out of your car? And one of the girls said, I have a plastic bag that I hang over the gear stick and I put the rubbish in. I was like, great. So then I did that. And then another friend might say, we had jars in the pantry and we label them so the kids know where to put it. And I was like, great, I'll try that. So then we bought a labeler and we labeled everything in the pantry so that I could easily find things or put things back. I'm not a systems person by nature. That was definitely something I had to do. We had, I think, 5 whiteboards around the house so that when I thought of something, I could quickly write it up there before it left my brain. In the the shower, I had a whiteboard marker so I could write on the glass or on the tiles if something came up into my mind in the shower. We had a cleaner that helped at that time, and she used to laugh. She'd be like, this is the best part of my week when I come in and see what you've been thinking about, because there's just this writing all over the shower wall, because I'd be like, oh yes, and I've got to remember this, or get an idea about something. So the systems was a big part. How do I create system externally to me that's going to help me function in an everyday life? Internally, my inner critic was pretty strong at that stage. You're not good enough. You're not doing enough. You should be better than this. Like, come on, like, keep going. One of my greatest strengths is my drive and my tenaciousness. Man, it brought me under at times in my rehab though, because I was cranky that I wasn't driving more, or that I wasn't working harder, or maybe if perhaps I just did another 5% of something, I might recover a little bit quicker. And so trying to find kindness and nurturing when you're in recovery for your life, like when you're trying to get your life back, whether that be being able to eat on your own, whether that be able to be a mum where your kids can be left alone with you. We had to have people in the house 24/7 for months post my hospital, because I would leave the door open and the kids would just walk out on the road. Remember, they're little toddlers, right? So finding that self-nurture and that love and that kindness to turn inwards and say it's okay was really hard and really challenging, and sometimes still is. Like, if I forget someone's name even today, because that's one of the hardest things for me is remembering people's names, this little voice that just pokes its little head up and says, how dare you not know who they are? And who do you think you are? Like, it's quite mean.